medical robots, cyber attacks, and climate solutions are all direct outcomes of innovation.
The world is advancing at a rapid rate, and balance is the key for peace. Welcome to the first ever April 2025 Middle School UNIS MUN Conference.
My name is Julian Danailov Ben-Gernan, and I am a Secretary General for the Middle School UNIS MUN Conference.
My name is Priyanshi Bora, and I'm also the Secretary General for the UNIS MUN MS Conference. Before we start, we'd quickly like to acknowledge our Deputy Secretary Generals. Please stand up. Miele Watley, Huyen Nguyen, and Hyo-Rin Chun.
Our theme for this year is how can we strengthen peaceful cooperation in the context of global innovation. This is timely and necessary as innovation is rapidly transforming the way our nations operate, communicate, and compete.
But without international cooperation, these advancements can create divisions instead of bridging them. The question is not whether we will innovate, but whether we can do so in a way that is inclusive, responsible, and peace-oriented.
Innovation is an unavoidable part of our day-to-day lives, but it is our responsibility in how we respond to it. Now, before we start with our opening ceremony video, we would like to show appreciation to the schools present here today.
Please stand up if you hear your school's name.
Alpha School,
True North International School, Nguyen Tut Tang,
and of course, UNIS Hanoi.
Now, we would like to show our opening ceremony video.
Calm down.
I want you to be mine again, baby. I know my lifestyle is driving you crazy. I cannot see myself without you. We call the fans down, you know what we do. I go out of my way to please you. I go out of my way to see you. And I want you to be mine again, baby. I know my lifestyle is driving you crazy. But I cannot see myself without you. We call them fans down, you know what we do. I go out of my way to please you.
Welcome to the
UNIS MUN
April 2025
Middle School
Conference. Thank you to the media marketing team for creating such an amazing opening ceremony video.
Now, we would like to introduce Ms. Sylvia Danilov. She is the representative of UNICEF in Vietnam. Before Ms. Danilov gives her speech, we would like to show a quick video.
Unreasonable. It's how you have to be if you want to change things. Relentless. Tenacious. The world's children need people like that. People who see impossible as incentive to try harder. Who find one good reason to keep going in the face of 1,000 reasons to stop. So, shout out to the hardcore, because big problems need big solutions from big game players. You know the type. The determined, the persistent, the unreasonable. UNICEF, in more than 190 countries and territories. We never give up until the rights of every child are protected. Are you with us? UNICEF, for every child.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sylvia Danailov. I'm the current director of UNICEF in Vietnam. And I'm really very honored and privileged to be with all of you today. And congratulations for being part of this conference. So today I would like to speak a bit about my work. Why did I choose to do what I'm doing today? What decisions did I take to be where I am? What are some of the lessons I have learned? And what are some of the challenges I had to address? And let me first start to tell you where I was born. The country where I was born went through a war and was disintegrated. Can someone guess which country it is in Europe? Yugoslavia. Correct. I was born in Yugoslavia and grew up with my family, especially my grandmother, who used to tell me stories of the Second World War. Unfortunately, many people, many children in my family died during that war. And I grew up with stories of loss, death, and tragedy. These were very vivid to my grandmother and became part of my life story. I was born 30 years approximately 30 years after the end of that war. And this year, we're celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe, and also the birth of the United Nations. So I guess you can know my age. When I was so young, growing up with these life stories, I promised myself that I will do my utmost that no more children, no more people die in wars. And then, when I was 8 years old, I migrated from Yugoslavia, at the time it was still Yugoslavia, to Switzerland. I was a migrant. I didn't speak the language in Switzerland, French, where I moved. I was a foreigner. I tried to fit in. Some people made me feel very well and welcomed. Some people made me feel different. I had an accent when I started to speak French. And at the time, one of the aspects that I learned is the empathy with the most vulnerable, empathy with people who are different, because I went through that. When the war broke in Yugoslavia, that was in the early 1990s, I was a student at the time. And this was my first direct experience volunteering, being a humanitarian, mobilizing my school to get some of the medical supplies, clothes, to people who needed it in my birth country. And I decided to study international relations and international public law in Geneva because I was interested to really deepen my knowledge of the global dynamics. What leads to wars? What can we do to bring peace? And I financed my studies working for some non-governmental organization providing legal support. My background is as a human rights lawyer, providing legal support to organizations and human rights defenders working around the world on human rights. My first job that I think I landed that was the first step towards getting to that career was working with the Swiss government in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a human rights expert. I was 24 years old, and my responsibility were to represent the Swiss government in the Human Rights Commission at the time. Today it's called the Human Rights Council, and also the United Nations General Assembly Third Committee. Now, does someone know what the United Nations General Assembly Third Committee focuses on? I know it's not maybe the debate of today, but the United Nations General Assembly has many committees, and that committee represents and focuses on human rights and humanitarian affairs. And so I learned some good lessons when I used to be a Swiss diplomat. One of those that I learned and caused me to become a coffee addict was that actually it takes a lot of time to negotiate resolutions, declarations. They happen in formal settings, but also in informal settings. One of my most memorable experiences at the time was we were negotiating an international protocol on the elimination of children's participation in conflict. And at the time, Swiss government, and I was representing the Swiss government, was trying to convince other countries to have our view, something that you will be doing these next days. And what I understood at the time, you have to spend as much time in formal discussion as informal discussion. I spent a lot of time in the coffee place outside of the conference room, talking to people, drinking coffee, eating, socializing, trying to find common grounds, and staying awake at night. We formed a coalition of like-minded states, non-governmental organizations, and 25 years ago, we were successful to find and to adopt an international optional protocol on the the prohibition of use of children in conflict. And this was really hard work. Lot of hours. I'm not saying you should be drinking coffee, but really the formal, the informal, the networking is extremely important, because to get to a consensus, you need everyone's view and a win-win approach. And another lesson I learned was that actually I have to be, and it was a hard learned lesson, I need to represent my country and not my own views. I had an incident at the time. I was in that coffee place outside of the conference room of the discussions, and I was chatting, I thought informally, with a journalist at some point talking about the human rights situation in Iran. At the time, and unfortunately still today, it's not a good situation. I totally forgot that I was a Swiss diplomat, and I have my own views on the situation. But actually, they were not the same as my government. And I had to spend a lot of time convincing that journalist that actually, he shouldn't be publishing my quotes. He agreed at the end because I was young and quite inexperienced, and he was, he had pity on me. But I could have caused an incident to my country by talking about my own views and not the views of Switzerland. So I did spend a few years being a Swiss human rights expert, diplomat. But then that's when I realized I don't want to be representing the views of my government, because mostly these views were oftentimes influenced by politics and economical interests. And my goal, my life goal, is to represent the most vulnerable populations, children, and defend their rights. And I wanted to really bring systemic change and really bring impact. And when I was traveling around the world, I could notice how the United Nations was working, and especially UNICEF, working around so many different countries. So I decided to join UNICEF. And I know that many people, and that was 24 years ago, and little did I know that I would live in 8 different countries and experience so many interesting experiences. And of course, you may wonder, what are the best experiences? Where did I work? I'm not going to be talking about all my experiences, but just a few also to illustrate some of the themes that you are talking about today on innovation. My first experience in Africa was working in Somalia. Now, who can tell me something about where Somalia is? What are the characteristics of Somalia? Pirates, yeah. So, exact. Somalia is in the Horn of Africa, at the tip of the Horn of Africa, surrounded by Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya. There's been a civil war for many, many years. We used to call that state, and maybe it's still called today, a failed state, because no governance, fragmented. When I went there, it was many warlords were there, proliferation of weapons, small arms. Children had a lot of challenges. Children were not protected. And I went there with UNICEF at the time, and I had quite a lot of challenges. And I must say my most memorable experiences are certainly experiences when I had experienced challenges. And this is really to encourage you. Sometimes you go through challenging situations, but we learn the most of those. Why, could someone tell me, why do you think I had challenges working in Somalia? Me, Sylvia. What was challenging? Can you picture that? Yes? Yes? What else? I didn't speak the language. I was young in a society that is quite focused on giving authority to older men, a very traditional and religious society where I was a young woman from Europe. And in that context, and oftentimes we find ourselves in contexts where we have to, we are who we are. I cannot change who I am, my age, my gender, my race. And sometimes we are confronted with situations where we need to earn credibility and assert ourselves. And in that context, what mattered was who I was. So I went, one of the anecdotes I have is that in that country there was still the death penalty against children. So one child was imprisoned, and the local authorities wanted to give a death penalty to that child. So I went and I tried to negotiate. And the first thing that the local authority told me was, who are you, the age of my daughter, to tell me what I should be doing in my territory? That was the first step. But then, through exchanges, through a lot of investment, through working with the local colleagues, we were able to establish trust. And sometimes working for the United Nations and UNICEF, you cannot confront directly the challenge. You have to find who influences those in decision-making. In the context of Somalia, those who had the most influence were the religious leaders. And so another story from that time, and one of my successes when I used to work there, for example, was to work towards the elimination of female genital mutilation that was impacting close to 100% of girls there. Does someone know what is female genital mutilation? Can you guess? Yes? You never heard of that because some countries are more impacted. In that place, based on tradition and beliefs, the female genitalia were either partially or fully cut, mutilated. And so in order to change that practice, we worked, and I worked as part of a team, and we discovered that, for example, those who have influence on the traditional leaders are very famous religious leaders sitting in Cairo. Al-Azhar University is a very known learning center in the Arab world for Muslim faith and learning. And we partnered. I traveled to Cairo so that those people can have an influence on the local people in Somalia and can change the practice. Just to say that sometimes we are confronted we're not always able to tell our stories. I think here in the negotiations, when you will be discussing, you are between yourselves, the same age, the same group, but oftentimes in real life, who you are, how you are, you cannot change, but you need to find ways to assert yourself, have thick skin. Doesn't matter they tell me I'm young and I'm a woman, I'm still going to focus and advocate for what is right, but sometimes you have to find some allies. Another context where I worked, I have my notes, but I think I'm jumping some of them. Another context where I used to work was in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, who can tell me where is the Democratic Republic of Congo or some of its characteristics? Yes. 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 What else? Yes. In the middle of Africa. Anything else? You wanted to say something? Two? Yes, exactly. There are two Congos. One is the Republic of Congo, and one is the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a big country, the size of Europe, in the center of Africa, where there has been a long civil war for ages. And when I used to work there, the number of displaced was the same number as Hanoi today, 8 million people. And I think it still is. 8 million people were displaced due to war and conflict. And I remember being in a place where we had some of these displaced people coming out of the forest because they stayed 6 months in the forest, escaping and hiding from some of the warlords. And we were there to provide them support. They came out of the forest, had eaten leaves and plants for months naked, and we were there to support them. This was heartbreaking. And today we are able to provide humanitarian assistance a bit faster. For example, we have some innovations. And talking about innovations, when I was in Somalia, the innovation there was to use the cell phone. It wasn't your smartphones of today. There were these old phones, and one of the innovations we had is that to use the phone to provide cash to people. That was one of the first places where we, through the phone, were able to provide cash. In the DR Congo and some of these places were using drones to know where people are and able to deliver humanitarian support. But one thing that was extremely frustrating and still is a challenge today is that as UNICEF and humanitarian worker and the UN, sometimes we are like firefighters. We try to extinguish fires. But are we addressing the root causes of the problems? Are we able to do that? And unfortunately, we are not that powerful as a United Nations agency. We need to work with those in powers in the Congo. These are the sub-regional powers, those who can put a stop to that conflict, to the root causes of the conflict that are oftentimes economic. And one of my frustrations is that even though they have the power, many of these countries are not putting pressure because there are too many economic gains to be made. And the children in the DR Congo today are still suffering. And so are children in Gaza, children in Sudan, children in Yemen, because the system is not always able to work, and the system is not, the international system's failures are sometimes there. And I will come back to that. Why I joined the United Nations, and I'll give some reflection on where we are today, was because of my belief in multilateral cooperation, international solidarity, and human rights. And we can see that we still need to invest in the United Nations. She, I say not UN, she is an old grandmother. The United Nations is 80 years old. How can we work so that the United Nations is fit for the 21st century, efficient, effective, and truly committed to its values of diversity, inclusion, and human rights? I also worked in many different countries, and I'm not going to go into details, but of course, if you have questions, I worked in Myanmar when the tsunami happened there. I worked in Haiti. You may have heard in 2010, there was an awful earthquake. 250,000 people died. They didn't die because of the earthquake. They died because of the poverty and the lack of governance in that country. The same magnitude of earthquake in countries that are more developed, where the standards are there, can survive. I worked in Senegal, in Laos. Today, I'm in Vietnam. I've been here for 7 months as the director of UNICEF. Vietnam is a fast developing country where the work of the United Nations is really to make sure that all the benefits and the economic growth and progress are benefiting everyone. And today, unfortunately, and I think you live in Vietnam, you are here, some of you are Vietnamese, there are still many communities and children who are not fully benefiting from the progress. Minority children, migrant children. I know you will be talking about climate migrants. There are many climate migrants in Vietnam today. The Mekong Delta River region, the drought there is pushing many of the populations to go to the big cities. And so just a few days ago, I was in Cao Bang. You know where Cao Bang is, huh? Someone has been there? Yeah, you know where it is. At a province at the border with China, you have to drive 8 hours to get there. And when I was there, I was talking to some of the children there to ask, what are their hopes? What do they want the United Nations to do for them? How can we support? And many of the children are talking about learning. How can the education, how can they learn to have the competencies and skills to be able to contribute to society? We are also using here, Vietnam is very advanced. The United Nations is working a lot on digital transformation, artificial intelligence, how these positive developments can enhance the results for children, how, for example, artificial intelligence can help children with disability learn, have access to learning in different manners. How can the digitalization of the health system help, for example, for the maternal and child health? But we also are working on some of the challenging impact of innovation and digital transformation. For example, how do we protect children online? What is put in place to regulate online access? How can we protect the data of people, but also children, and not it be used for manners that are not respectful of their rights? So we work on many of these aspects, and maybe to talk about some of the challenges that I have today and what keeps me awake at night. One is, of course, the global situation right now. I think we all know the dynamics are changing globally. United States, superpower, the biggest contributor to humanitarian and development work for the United Nations, but also for many of the international and NGOs, has radically changed their stance, their global stance. And what worries me is not, of course, it's the funding also. We get less funding to do the work we have to do. So as a manager, I have to think how we're going to sustain that period. But what worries me most is really the attacks of the very values and the foundation on which the multilateral system, the world peace, security is based. And I devoted my life to the United Nations, more than close to 25 years. And when I see now that values such as diversity, integrity, gender, human rights are being questioned, that really worries me. And it worries me how we're going to adapt and transform so that the UN at 80 is continuing to be so strong as has been before. Now, I want to show the message. I will be concluding to give you the chance to get to questions. I would like to show you the message of a young girl called Mia, because I want us to think, what can we do to make a difference in this world?
Unreal.
The next one.
Children should be seen and not heard. They say you'll understand when you're older. You're just a kid. But a kid swam for 3 hours on the open sea to save 18 lives and became an activist for refugees. A kid broke through barriers to keep migrant families together and delivered a message of hope.
Let us fight with love, faith, and courage so that our families will not be destroyed.
A kid was forced to kill in a brutal civil war and became a human rights activist, freeing other children from violence. A kid fought for girls' right to education, was shot in the head in retaliation, and won the Nobel Prize.
This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education, who want peace, who want change.
And a kid spoke truth to power, inspiring a historic movement against climate change.
We kids shouldn't have to do this. I wish that the adults would take their responsibility and do this instead. But since no one's doing anything, we have to.
Kids are speaking up. Kids are demanding their rights. Kids are acting now for a better tomorrow. What will you do?
What will you do? What will you do? Did you recognize some of the children? Someone recognize some of them? Yes? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Now I have to remember. You know her name? Malala. Malala. She was from Pakistan. Someone else recognizes? Yes? Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who fought for climate change. Anyone else? Yeah? Yes, so I actually should remember her name, but the Syrian girl who swam and then also participated in the Olympic Games as part of the refugee team, because she was not representing Syria at war, but she was, and there is a movie about her. So what will you do? And first I want to say that this is fantastic that you're all here. You're giving your time. No one is forcing you, I hope, I know. To be part of this discussion, to learn really valuable skills. We're all privileged to have this opportunity. Maybe 3 concrete recommendations, and then I will be very happy to dialogue with you further. 1, please use every opportunity to volunteer, to give your time, your energy, your efforts. I know here many students in UNIS are doing service learning. In other schools, I'm sure it's the case. How can we give to those who are most vulnerable? It's not just the right thing to do, but it also gives you real experience, practice, lessons that you can apply in the future life. Second, open up your networks. Challenge yourself always to go and talk to people who are not just, around you, comfort zone. You talk to your friends, people who you know. Challenge yourself in the personal life, but also those who professionally can help you get maybe a step closer to your dreams. Go and try to talk to them. Sometimes some young person comes to me and wants to talk to me. Maybe, I may be nice, I say no, but even if someone says, I say yes, but even if someone says no, it's not a big risk. Try to network, open up your horizon, learn from others. And 3 is not just to seize opportunities, but create opportunities yourself. I know each one of you have big dreams. Don't look only at the formal ways to get to this dream. Seize opportunities to really do something creative, take risks, and make a change. And I want to complete my talk, I hope I'm in time, with one of my favorite quotes from Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Be the change you want to see." Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
So-
Danailov, for your inspiring speech. We will now move into a Q&A session. We will ask the first two questions, and after we are done asking the first two questions, you can line up on either side to ask your questions. We will move on to the questions.
So, Miss Sylvia, I would firstly like to ask, do you regret having left the diplomacy to work for UNICEF?
Today, I don't regret at all because, through the life I had, I don't think staying in the diplomacy, I could have done and achieved so much for the field of human rights and child rights. Because Switzerland is a small country, so you cannot specialize when you work for Swiss diplomacy. You have to be very polyvalent. And some people may like to work on economic aspect, cultural aspect, etc. I always wanted to focus on what I'm passionate about, is on human rights. So I don't regret leaving the Swiss diplomacy. Where I see limitations of my work is what I was saying before. We don't always have the power to address the root causes of what is impacting human rights violations, how we can influence. And so I think it's through alliances. Many of the people I used to work with are now ambassadors, and I try to also work with them and work together to bring change. No, I don't regret. Plus, I live in beautiful countries in many parts of the world, and was lucky to experience the world through working with such a great organization. I'm very fond of UNICEF.
Thank you.
How can someone like us as students get our first job in the UN?
Yes, that's a good question, and I'm oftentimes asked that question. I got my first job because I was in discussions. I worked with UNICEF colleagues when I was in the Swiss government, but also many students or first-time job seekers find jobs that are, for example, easier to find with the non-governmental organization, local organization, because the UN, also one of the challenges, is very bureaucratic, sometimes hierarchical, and it's not always easy to find jobs. So what I'm telling you is that pursue what you like to do. The focus should not be to work for the UN, that will be my advice. The focus should be what you want to achieve. And maybe the UN is best placed, and at some point you could go there. There are internships, there are volunteer positions, there are ways to get to the UN. But really the focus should be what are you aiming to achieve. And sometimes it's easier to land a job with a local organization, non-governmental organization, than the United Nations, because we are a global organization. The competition to get there is quite strong, and the standards and what is required as a first entry job are quite high. So get your experience, and then talk to people like me, network. Get advice, come speak to me, and get your networks, because it's also having the right information, knowing when to apply, how to apply, what you could bring as an added value that can help.
Thank you. We will now be moving into the Q&A session. Please line up on either sides of the stage if you want to ask a question, and please keep your questions brief. Thank you.
In 2023, in the Human Trafficking in Persons report, Vietnam was placed in Tier 2 watch list, but in 2024, the following year, it was placed in Tier 2, going down an entire tier. Could you tell me what impact UNICEF has made in the trafficking in Vietnam?
Okay. Wow, so you know well the situation. You know, that is one of the key focus of our work, is to work on the most vulnerable, the situation of the most vulnerable children. And in Vietnam, trafficking, especially of girls, but not only of girls, but also of boys, is a challenge, with China especially at the border with China. So we've worked with the government all these years to put some legislation in place, first to prohibit the trafficking, second to also help the enforcement of this legislation, but also it's not just how to respond to situation, but also how to educate communities, parents, to be very mindful that sometimes, traffickers lure their victims, telling them, they'll find a better life outside. Parents might be trusting to let their children go away, not knowing all the dangers. So it's through a wide range of initiatives. I don't think it's just because of United Nations work that situation has improved, but there is a high level of awareness of the challenges and many different parts that are working on that, but we're still far from really being able to eradicate all forms of trafficking. It's still a big problem in the country. When I was in Kalbang, that was one of the topics we also discussed. Thank you.
I have a question currently. In 2010, there was an earthquake in Haiti. It caused 200,000 people to lose their lives. When you were working there, what was the life conditions for children? Was there poverty? Did that have world hunger? And did they have clean water to drink?
Yes. So you're asking me about the earthquake when I was working in Haiti?
Yes.
Yes. And thank you for that question. I can tell you what I saw in Haiti, but you also know that recently there was the earthquake in Myanmar that also impacted Thailand, and it's the same situation. The challenge in Haiti, who knows where Haiti, where is Haiti? Where do you know? Yes. So, yes? Yes, it's in the Caribbean. It's a small island. Half of the island is called Haiti. The other half of the island is the Dominican Republic. And Haiti, unfortunately, has been very poor governance. Many people have benefited from, plundering that country, resources, wealth. So people have been extremely poor, unfortunately. So when the earthquake happened, that was on the 12th of January 2010, people were living in makeshift houses, in buildings that never respected the standards for earthquake-prone region because no government, no authorities were enforcing those standards. So when the earthquake happened, houses collapsed on people. Even if people were still alive, there was very little help that could reach them quickly. So it was very difficult. The health services collapsed, the schools were destroyed, the water pipes were destroyed. So not only people suffered from the immediate impact of the earthquake, that is what happens in many of the earthquakes, but what is even more tragic is the indirect impact of an earthquake. Cholera started. Cholera is a waterborne disease where you don't have good hygiene, sanitation, and you get infected. So it was a very dire situation in Haiti. UNICEF, United Nations, many international and national governmental, non-governmental organization countries stepped up to try to address the situation. And as one always says, let's not waste a crisis. Let's use a crisis and a challenge to try to do better. The term of build back better, even when Typhoon Yagi impacted Vietnam, all the support and the work is not just to rebuild how it was before, but to rebuild better, to invest in the resilience of people. So that's what we tried to do. My husband who is there and I were deployed. He used to work for the World Food Programme. I was working with UNICEF. We were deployed to Haiti. We used to live in Laos, which was very peaceful. So we were sent to Haiti and we were living in tents. I was showering close to my boss. That was very embarrassing. So, there were no facilities. It was challenging to work there, but we were able to do some work.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for asking.
So when I used to be smaller than now, I was told by stories that countries like China wants the East Ocean that
lies besides Vietnam. Like they just use their power to claim themselves the territory, and the reason why. And my teacher said that the reason why we couldn't fight back by just sending resolutions to the UN is that they are one of the P5s. So that means that when the resolution is voted through, they only one vote that goes against it will ruin it all. So I would like to ask, how could we change it, and why can't we do like votes or debates so that we can change the P5s?
Yes. So thank you, because you bring a specific problem and then to the governance of the international system. I can give you some of my views. I'm not the international expert on that, but for sure the fact that some of those who have veto power in the Security Council and at the international system are also some of the perpetrators of instability and threats to peace is a big challenge. And this has always been the case. I mean, you speak about China. We can speak about also what is happening in Ukraine. We can speak also how some of the what is happening in the Middle East, in Gaza, is impacted by veto power of some of the people there. There has been discussions on reforming the Security Council, having more diverse voices there. The challenge is that still we are in a system where sovereign states and power states it's very difficult to intervene in a country and influence. So that's why, you have bamboo diplomacy that Vietnam is very apt at, to engage with those countries, and different ways to influence and to reform the Security Council system as well.
Thank you for answering. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for the question.
Hello, I'm Jisoo, who is in grade 10. I'm also in our UNIS Director, Mr. A's INS class. And currently we're learning about human rights in our Unit 3 lesson. So I just have a few questions about, as you mentioned before, there are a lot of root causes of humanitarian issues that should be addressed. I want to ask you, what do you think is the most urgent issue, humanitarian issue that should be mentioned globally, and what do you think is the role of policymakers on addressing these issues and emphasizing the need of
the
role of policymakers on?
Yeah, I mean the challenge is that those perpetrators are going with there is no accountability. What is happening today, for example, in Gaza, where the system is not able, no one is putting the pressures. Now, this is the root causes, is really the will of the powers and being able to pressure and have the international indignation. We cannot let it happen. And Gaza and Ukraine have been on the news, but Yemen, Sudan, Afghanistan, there are many such places. So when it comes to humanitarian action, is to be able to really respect the values and foundations of humanitarian action, impartial, neutral, humane. The fact that humanitarian workers are not only prevented to go and help those in needs, but are being targeted, is really total disrespect of the standards. When I was working in Somalia or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we could have access. That was several years ago. The access was even easier. We could negotiate with the warlords. We were able to make case because, even the Red Cross sign was respected. The fact that I have a T-shirt or we have the UN logo was respected. Today, this is not the case. And this is where I hope we can find answers how to put, how to exert pressure, how young voices can count, how the voices of people can impact, because those on power should not be there if that is what they're doing. So I'm sorry I don't have more to say, but this is for me the biggest challenge is non-respect of human rights, humanitarian law, and those in power not doing what needs to be done, and people remaining silent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering about what can be done. So like recently we're seeing like with militaries and countries, they're using different types of warfare like drones and things like that. So what can be done to like make it so that human rights are respected, because drones, like, they don't feel the same way that humans do, so they could maybe, yeah.
No, so that is exact. I mean, the warfare today has changed. And I know in one of your discussions, you also look at the cyber warfare, the hybrid warfare, new weapons that can be used. You know, artificial intelligence has so many positive uses. I was talking about the fact how we use artificial intelligence so that children, neurodivergent children with disabilities can learn better. But how can we control this? What should be the standards? And there are no standards. I think the standards need to be established, and countries, states, but also private sector, and everybody needs to come together to be able to regulate what is happening. And the regulation is extremely important, is the first step, the regulation, and then the implementation of that regulation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you went to a lot of countries to volunteer, and I want to ask that what made you choose Vietnam to be the director of? And do you ever want to be the director of another country instead of ours?
Yes, thank you. So I'm lucky to work for an organization where we can choose, put some criteria to choose. And I must say, when I used to work in Laos many years ago, I would come to Vietnam quite often. And I was always attracted to work here, because I think there is, I mean, this year, at the end of the month, we mark 50 years of the end of the American war, some call it Vietnam War. And 50 years ago, some of you have grown up in Vietnamese families, others, I encourage you to talk to people who have gone through the war, because the memories are very fresh. This country was devastated. And for me, the progress that has taken place and all that has happened is really incredible. But still, there are so many things to be done here. And so for me, it's very interesting, after having worked in a failed country like Somalia, in emergency context. The last post I had was in West Africa, in Senegal. The beauty of my job is that you can change context. So going from Senegal, West Africa, and dynamics in the Sahel, and coming here, where Vietnam is playing the bamboo diplomacy, communist regime, lots of investment on progress and innovation, but still quite a lot to be done for most vulnerable children. That's what attracted me, plus the beauty of the country and the fantastic food. And this school, because 2 of my children are in this school, so that counts also a lot when you are an international United Nations worker, where you have a community and where the good school is. And having a United Nations international school was one of the defining criteria to choose to come here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So currently I'm working on climate migration, and I've learned that climate migrants they're often faced with discrimination, like racial discrimination, and usually climate migrants cannot return to their country because they're afflicted by climate change impacts, and they're forced to leave their country for their safety. And sometimes host communities, they don't really accept their culture, their cultural aspects and societal norms that the climate migrants are often used to. And so I wanted to ask you how can we eradicate and reduce discrimination for climate migrants, as well as improving the migration and integration process for them?
Yes, so thank you, and this is a good description of what is happening. There are more and more climate migrants around the world because of the climate change crisis. And, you know, some of them change countries, but you also have internal migration. And because they have to leave their context and are coming to places where there might be competition for jobs, there might be some economic pressures, this is a big challenge. So one is really to find ways, one, to address the root causes. How do you address the impact, mitigate the impact of climate change, invest in the communities so that, forced migration, when migrants have to move, not because it's their choice, but because the conditions, doesn't happen. So that are a lot of the preventative aspect to be done. And second is really working on having fair policies, non-discrimination in places of work, in host countries, host communities, in schools, giving the fair chances to everyone so that, when there is a choice or that there are ways to regulate that. I think the International Organization of Migration within the United Nations is really investing and working on these topics. Here in Vietnam, as I was telling you, the other day I was in Ho Chi Minh City, which is a big magnet. Big cities are big magnets for migrants from the Mekong Delta region. Because a lot of the places, you go to some of the places in the Mekong Delta region, the adults have left to work in the cities. The grandparents are there with the children, and the parents go to the big cities, and the conditions are not always there. Workers don't always have the same rights. So we have to address both in the Mekong Delta region and investing in sustainable access to water resources, climate resilient services, but also what happens in the big cities and how can we improve their situation. But this is one of the topic of today's world. Vietnam is one of the most impacted countries by climate change. It's not the only one. What are the consequences and how can we work on those? I don't have all the solutions. You need to find some of the solutions through your negotiations and resolutions in your commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So recently I was researching the housing crisis and informal housing situation in Vietnam, and with the recent typhoon in September, I know that the situation got a lot worse. So I was wondering what UNICEF has done and how they've contributed to help the sort of informal housing areas in Vietnam.
Thank you. And actually, I would be very happy to share with you any resources after this talk, including on your question, what we have done here, because I came a month before, we moved to Vietnam a month before Typhoon Yagi happened. That was the worst typhoon in 70 years in Vietnam. Impacted, we counted more than 2.5 million children and their communities. And so our mandate is to work on several sectors: education, health, water, hygiene, sanitation. The housing crisis was already there before and has been more impacted. UNICEF doesn't work directly on the housing. We have other United Nations agencies such as UNDP or even IOM in some of the zones that are investing in rebuilding the houses, and looking at also how populations living in areas that are prone to flooding, typhoons can be relocated in a voluntary manner. But I'll be very happy to share with you. I actually have fantastic videos also showing the impact of the work. And a lot of the investments are still continuing. It's only 6 months after. Many of the bridges are still broken. Some of the hospitals and schools are destroyed, and families don't have the housing. So the work is still continuing because many of those people in the northern regions of Vietnam are still suffering of the aftermath of Typhoon Yagi. Thank you.
Since you work for UNICEF, from your past years of work, have any of the children noticed your work?
Have any?
Have any of the struggling children noticed your work?
Notice our work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the focus of our work is both to work with those in power, the governments and the authorities, so that they fulfill their duties toward children, but also working with children and young people themselves so that they are empowered to claim their rights. You know, people have responsibilities. We call them the duty bearers. They have a responsibility to implement the rights, and we work with a lot of the children and young people here in the country. A lot of networks of networks of young people, for example, engaged on climate change. We're trying to work with them, and they give us the feedback on how our work is being done, because we are not perfect. We're trying our best, but for sure, I do hope that some of the children that we are assisting, providing better opportunities, can then themselves become agents for change. Here, we are all privileged. We have access to good education, to services, but some of the children who don't have that and are provided are sometimes even stronger advocates. They've gone through hardships, they've benefited from support, then they know that the power of support, empathy, cooperation helps. And I think that is really why I do what I do, is that it's the international solidarity and having an impact that can change lives. Even if one person and one child comes and thanks us, that is already something positive. But again, I'll be very happy after this talk to share with those who are interested. The topic was also to share my experience, not just to talk about UNICEF, but UNICEF, I'm happy to share some of the examples of the results and impacts we have in Vietnam, how you can get involved with UNICEF, some of the UNICEF networks of young people in the country, but also what we do outside that can inspire your work.
Thank you very much. Can we give a big round of applause, please? We will be taking a group selfie, all of us together. Thank you everyone for your patience. I know we're going a bit over time, but let's hold on. So.
And with that, we would like to gavel into the UNIS MUN April Conference 2025.
Thank you. Please follow your admins and chairs back to your conference rooms and committee rooms. Thank you.